and be implemented badly and not have achieved success. And so what's better, to pick a good partner and go with a tool that they tell you and be, know that you're going to get something that's of value, or to figure out what the best tool is and then perhaps not put as much time and effort into picking the vendor and have it implemented badly. And so we've actually started to make, I've been advising some clients to actually not worry so much about the nitty-gritty of each feature left and right, but to go with what your partner tells you. If you feel like the partner has your best interest, understands what you're doing, understands your sector, understands how you work, those things are far more likely to contribute to success than having selected the wrong tool.
Right. The other thing that Eve's taping us surreptitiously, she thinks, but it's very obvious.
Not at all.
The other thing that could be interesting to talk about is, the marketplace changes so frequently. Vendors come and go, products come and go. What can you do to prevent yourself going down a path that's going to lock you in to not being able to be responsive when the vendor of the platform that you're on starts to fail, starts to not be developed any further, goes completely gone, it gets acquired, and then,
Well, that's the big reason that open
stuck.
source is such a big priority now, because the promise is that you will not be locked in, that there is always this potential that you can keep it and pick it up.
That's the promise, but how accurate is that promise? I mean, a lot of these platforms like Drupal, there's a ton of customization that you have to do on top of that, and then are you stuck with the vendor who did that customization because nobody else can figure it out and they haven't even documented it? And
I agree with you. If the promise of open source is probably another topic that is very much intertwined in here about whether that promise is actually real.
Yeah.
Most vendors, most clients don't contribute back to the community. Most vendors start with the community and then take things and extend them, and very rarely do they put stuff back that's fully baked. They put stuff back that's, here's what we have, do with it what you want, but it's not baked, fully baked. It's not supported. It's not.
Jeff is taking this conversation.
I am.
So at the end of the day, what is the hype around and the promise of open source, and how is that realized?
And
how do you measure that?
How can the client protect themselves? What can they ask the vendor to do? What can they, what sort of requirements can they put in place with their vendor so that their vendor doesn't take them down a dead-end path that's going to be difficult for them to get out of down the road? Are there things they can do?
Yeah, I mean, part of what we were suggesting is that they're not choosing open source products that are so wide open that in reality what you get isn't very fully baked to begin with. It's just a sort of a platform that requires so much effort to actually make it into what you want, that by the time you take your site and compare it to someone else's site, they're actually very, very different, and they're so custom that no two vendors can take and swap each other's sites without a significant amount of overwork, because the tool itself isn't a real product that is defined, that is consistently developed, that is trainable, right? You get training.
That is upgradable.
Potentially as well, right? So if you pick open source products that are more fully baked, that might have this sort of product idea to them, then you can take that from one vendor to another, or from one client to another, and be reasonably assured that 70, 80, 90% of it is more or less the way it should work because it's already baked, and you're just customizing around the edges, as opposed to taking a core set of tools with a set of extensions that are really available but not integrated in a way that is a product or distribution, and then having what you create on your site so very different than everybody else who has the same starting point.
So what happens if you go with a product, or you go with a vendor and then they disappear, a year down the line, and you need support? How can a nonprofit actually protect themselves from that?
Well, in an ideal world, there'd be documentation and code that they would have access to, so that somebody else could come in and suss out what was there and pick it up. But 9 times out of 10, when somebody comes to us with an existing site on an existing platform, most of the time it's still some sort of proprietary platform. There's not a heck of a lot we can do. I mean, it's for the time it would take us to completely get in there and understand what they have in order to maintain it would cost too much. So it's just easier to say, well, we're just going to migrate you off, and that may in fact mean copying and pasting the content manually, because we can't even get in to pull the content out in any sensible way. So unfortunately, unless they've ahead of time worked with their vendor, or their vendor is particularly conscientious and has documented the heck out of what they've put together, you're a lot of times you're just sort of stuck having to start over.
I think that's a great argument for adding some time on the front loading your project with some time to do a little more due diligence on your vendors, partners, products.
Yeah.
I think it's also,
as opposed to, I think a lot of organizations are just like, oh, well, so and so used WordPress, so that's probably good enough for us too.
Yeah.
I think it's also true that the risk that people talk about a fly-by-night vendor or a vendor going away completely is a little overblown. I mean, the reality, there's two realities and probably 2 areas where the risks vary. If you're working with a service provider, like a vendor that you subscribe to monthly and access it over the web, and you don't actually have any code in your physical possession, whether you own it or not, you don't have it, then you're much more at risk for that vendor shutting down, closing their doors, and being stuck with nothing, let alone, no code and no data.
And no website.
And no
website.
Server's
down.
Right. But if you've got a licensed product,
nothing but a bill.
A traditional product, whether it be a Red Dot or a Sitecore or whatever the product is, you pay a maintenance fee on that license, and if you stop paying that fee, you own or you have the right to continue to use that in perpetuity, and so you're not out of luck, but you over time become less viable, and so you can manage.
But you got plenty of time.
You have plenty of time.
Plenty of time in that situation.
And the data is in your control, and so you can sort of do that. So the bigger the risk is probably on the ASP, the software as a service, the cloud-based models, but the traditional licensing, the lock-in question and the risk question, are probably no different than the likelihood that an open source project is going to just fork itself into oblivion, or some college student's going to shut his garage door and do a real job and not support the product. I mean, those are probably equal, but I think they come with stigma and perception that is really outsized.
All right. Well, we've had a conversation here with Lynn Labiniak and Jeff Herron from Beacon Fire.